Welcome. I'm David Sachs, and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Peter Magyar. Professor Magyar is a registered architect in Hungary and in Europe. He holds a master's degree in architecture and urban design and a doctorate degree from the University of Budapest. He's taught in a variety of places around the world, including Africa and Europe. In this country, he's taught at the University of Cincinnati, at Auburn University, at Penn State University, where he was department head, at Florida Atlantic University, where he was the founding director before coming to us as department head of architecture about 5 or 6 years ago, 7 years ago. He has entered a number of international competitions and has been consultant on a number of buildings. And he won his native country's highest architectural award, the Pro Architectura Hungarica medal. And so I think we're very fortunate to have Peter in our midst. And I know I am. I've come to know Peter through the years and to respect him very much as a true gentleman and a true friend. So will you join me in welcoming Peter Magyar?
Thank you, David. I switched it on. Do you hear me? Yes. Colleagues, friends, thank you very much for coming. I am not Peter Eisenman because at his lecture everybody was sitting around here, but still, thank you very much. You kind of honored me being here, the unknown person. This book I treasure not just because of one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, Jorge Luis Borges, but also because that title could have been my book's title, The Book of Imaginary Beings, number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. So it didn't happen, of course. I will show you 4 books, or not show them, but actually describe them. Imagine that I am a docent, a kind of guide in a museum which has only 4 rooms, and each room has a book in it or some images of the book, contents of the book. As you would be asked in a museum that you enter this room, please read the information. I guess you will be tired from my accent if I read all that, so I will ask you to read the text of the introductory ideas related to each of the books. But I will talk about, not much, but talk about the drawings which I show in connection with them. If we say that architecture is the mother of art, then maybe these are the fathers. It's Walter Gropius on the left side, Béla Bartók, Hungarian composer, in the middle, and Paul Klee on the right side, your right. It's very interesting in many ways because I have been for the last 15 years as an external examiner in the Bauhaus, but I never knew that Béla Bartók, one of the, maybe among the 2 famous Hungarian composers of the early 20th century, mid-20th century, have been there. I have been in the house of Paul Klee, which is a duplex together with Kandinsky. Was interesting. I was so taken by that he lived there, and they showed me Kandinsky's half of the house, who I guess was a very interesting person. Every third week, he repainted the house. So somewhat reminded me to Torgir, who rebuilds his house in every few months, I think. Now, coming to the lecture, Duco ergo sum. I plagiarized this from the Latin cognitive, or cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. If this transformation is I draw because I am, and I have to make a little inventory. I approximately have archived, not quite in the museum quality, around 10,000 drawings. The 4 books I'm talking about will contain around 1,000 images, and I show you around 100, less than 100 images. So you will really see the top of the iceberg, and hopefully you get some flavor, some introduction, what I am really interested in. If we play with the word further, that the docu is changed to duco, the duco is changed to docu, the document comes to one mind, and of course document immediately leads you to documenting those drawings, and that's what I did mostly. I felt that very few books are which are dealing with the process of design, architectural design. Therefore, I think our education is somewhat product-oriented, which is, I don't think, the best way, because you really don't learn to design a theater or a library or a single-family house, but you learn design. And design has certain general rules and general methods which you can learn maybe from the examples done by others. The 4 books are published in 99, 2012, 2010, 2012, and 2013. And I intended to do from the very beginning a so-called evergreen architecture. I want to copyright this expression because I was really many times dissatisfied with the fact that, for example, brick is called a non-sustainable material, and yet we have buildings which are 5,000 years old. So I think sustainability has to be really re-evaluated, and the social aspects as well as, besides the technical and the monetary, has to be taken account. I said here in the end that I want to reach the beyond knowledge state which children have, which actually is a higher level of ignorance, where you are related to your subconscious, which is always ready to provide you the necessary information, but still you see everything at first, everything like the child looks at it, everything as something to be discovered. Thought Palaces was the first book, serious book. I had 3, I would say, rather smaller booklets published before in Auburn University. And if you see the paler A, there is a play with the thought places also. And now I would like if you can read this introduction to the book. Can you read it in the back? I would emphasize the method which I call space print, because it has a surface quality which simultaneously describes both space and non-space. It's very interesting in architecture that we usually are talking about space and designing and drawing the non-space, the solid and the buildings. So with this one, I developed this idea that you can parallel simultaneously observe and develop, articulate the both of the elements of architecture, and so that's why hopefully it's easier to relate to both and understand them. Excuse me, yes. The image which you have seen on the first beginning of the projection is an imaginary being which is standing for, symbolizes purity of intent. And this is a very interesting idea for me, because obviously the purity of intent, the intent of social, culture, humanistic and other elements related to architecture are given. You count on them. But there is something else, and I tell it in this simple way, or say it in simple way, that it's the geometry, purity of geometry, what you intent of geometry, because any of these earlier mentioned qualities are manifested through the geometrical form of the building. Please come in, there are lots of chairs here, so. And this, which is 3 apartments in a Japanese, in Tokyo, in one of the first drawings, belong to this kind of imaginary beings, almost like monsters, but the geometrical aspects are explored through it. This is also a first drawing, one of the first drawings of a villa. And I just would like to show you this, that one has to develop this ability to what you think, as you used to say, and now I am also prone to say that it's in my head, I just have to draw. So this transfer from your head to the drawing is a very important thing, and you just have to be, I guess, courageous and believe that you can do, because everybody can do. It's not something which you have to be afraid of. This is a special project. This is one of the first of the 3 Hungarian theaters, national theaters, which I designed very long time ago. And through it, I became somewhat known to the architecture community, to the grown-up architecture community, because I designed it while I was in the architecture school as a competition, national, international competition. So it was really something which just another encouragement for you that dare to do it, because that's how you learn and that's how you progress. I like these little, I said, limping prose poems. Earth opens, drama condenses to space. Because somehow it really defines a theater, at least for me. Now, this is obviously a chair, or two views of a chair. And it has also, that's very funny, definition that between the lines, matter withstands gravity of bodies and thoughts. This could be even a kind of program in architectural design, because that's what we are doing. We are drawing, and the lines represent the material. If you think, I was very surprised that how your mind regulates what you believe or what you see. Don't you see clearly that the chair material where that dot is solid, and this is the air? I sort of started to see after I programmed my mind in this way. So I think programming your mind is something which is a very important element in design. This is one of my favorites. It's the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in Venice. I think I would say this is the most complicated drawings which I drew directly on paper ever. And it's really unifies lots of thinking. I have to say that usually when I'm, for example, now I am doing a competition to exactly the same place as the first National Theater was built in the National or the City Park of Budapest. So weeks, sometimes even months precede the actual drawing, but when I'm drawing, then it just goes on and on. This, too little time to explain, but I also studied before I did this, the Venetian Palazzo as a building type, and all of that tripartite elements which are part of the Venetian Palazzo are here in a very complex way in several directions. Again, I'm sorry, but could not be get into the individual projects because we will here till midnight. This was a project which I did when I learned that in Florida Atlantic University they want to build a new school for architecture. It was a very nice sounding sentence, but it turned out that yes, part of the building would be the School of Architecture, all the others will be something different. So I just couldn't withstand not to design something, and referring back to my African days where I admired the learning trees in Africa, where children and the teacher were sitting under the banyan tree and learned through that, mostly on verbal ways. So this also represents the two major forces, the compression and the tensional forces. And it's even green because between the circular, the cylindrical element and the square donut, there is air circulation, so there is cross ventilation. Wooden louvers cover the windows, so it would have been even tornado proof, or any other ways could be regulated the temperature and the conditions inside. This is the second book, 2010, and it has only 3 projects in it. Let me again ask you to read. Excuse me. could not have, but when one is designing, you are making also observations like you would be a lay person who is not an architect. And in that way, or with this child's involved mind, I made these observations that you deal with in many of my designs. I had, I guess, statistically enough designs to observe them. And you could distinguish between data processing, data interpretation, micro and macro geometrical exploration and articulation, and then preliminary and final drawings. So those are the different elements which will be very close to the musical notation indicated in each of the three buildings. I would like just to emphasize this, that architecture is the highest manifestation of public art. It unites the spatial, temporal aspect of art and affects one simultaneously in the visceral, cerebral, and cosmic dimensions. Maybe that's why we like them so much and affect them. This is, again, the same building, and on the middle, you can see the location, the position of these abbreviated notions, data processing, data interpretation, and so on. The drawings are numbered, so when it comes to the final summary, you can just map the drawings in the appropriate place. This was another building which was a house for a virtuoso, also in Venice. And this was the third project, the so-called Venice Gate competition, which was really just a bus station with some office building, but the positioning it on the Grand Canal made it a very interesting exploration. And this drawing, I enlarged it because they are somewhat in the manner of these imaginary beings. They look more than a building only. So then, of course, even with space print, you are investigating structures, definitely, and materials. And Martin, who did this model, with my phone call to Alvaro Siza, gained a 2-year internship with him as a model maker. So I'm very proud that this model helped him to have to work with one of the great architects of our times. Here is that so-called partitura of the design process, where, of course, the upper numbering is the drawings. As you can see, not even all the drawings are included. However, the major drawings are all there. And even if this short competition has 150 or so drawings. So the numbers are not just for the sake of numbers, but when you are really questioning in the design process and not making statements, they are automatically come up as the next and the next level. So you cannot almost stop. I made an inventory again that I lived around 20-some thousand days. I have the 10,000 drawings, so every second day I produce the drawing. So that's maybe how you can go that, yes, it's not only the drawing what you live for, but it's definitely one of the major pleasures which you get from life when you can explore and invent, in many cases, some things which haven't been. That Peggy Guggenheim Museum's geometry led me to invent a so-called cubicum, where all the edges are same, but it's still not a platonic solid because it's not a solid. It divides the space to two equal parts, and it can be added to infinitely. So I had some mathematician friends, and they were definitely having some problem where to put it. But they were this was just a byproduct of design. This is the third project, the urban innuendos, and I just blown it up because one of the 3 or 4 co-authors who had written essays in the book emphasized this, that the journal, this book, or the drawings actually, are a journal of emotion because they show how you draw, how fast you draw, where you hesitate, and so on. And of course, my favorite tool, as most of you know, is this, my fountain pen. However, I have some problems with it now because I wait for the kind of divorce settlement because now I started to draw with on the tablets with a very blunt tool, the stylus. I show some drawings from that as well. Again, in this volume, only the inception of the architecture idea is recorded. It's telling you in different ways that they are unfinished projects, but still, I value them because they were developed to a certain degree of readiness where most probably the additional development would have been only quantitative mostly and not qualitative. Geometry I referred to, this is a big mansion to Chicago. I worked for an office in Alabama and they had a client. And this is the Supreme Court building on the left lower corner, which was to be connected to the Alabama Capitol building, which is kind of halved on the right edge of the drawing. This is drawn from a photograph, a city, street, Dexter Avenue. On the left lower corner, you will see a building in the second half of my talk, which I designed as a design consultant and actually design principal of a firm. Here is the closer look at this geometry. Interestingly, I used Michelangelo's geometry where the inscribed circle into a square was repeated several ways, and that generated this shape. On the left edge, lower edge of the drawing is the chapel where Reverend Martin Luther King was a pastor in his youth. So it was a very interesting element that the judicial building looked through this church towards the Capitol building, and that was always a memento of justice. Alvar Aalto's first building was a military recruiting office, and that's the left with the punched windows. And an international competition was about to add a concert hall to it. And he had also in this Iverskula already two other buildings. On the middle of the image approximately is the theater, and the lower L-shaped building is a police station. So this and the park, this was the urban situation into which this was one of the earlier drawings of my project. This was in Fort Lauderdale, a guild house for architecture, the AIA headquarters plan design. This playhouse, Royal Playhouse in Copenhagen, where the right side you have the fortress, the octagonal square contains or is surrounded by the Royal Palace, several buildings, and the two triangular intersecting, that would have been the theater, or that's what I developed for it. This small building was a house for a poet, a student competition. I very often did design the student competition also myself, just to test myself and maybe learn how difficult projects we are assigning to students. This is the inside of it. This would have been an interesting project if I could finish it. It was a museum to Oslo, and the two buildings in the right side with the circular plaza in front is the city hall, and on the left side the three elements would have been the museum, related to both to the city hall as well as to the seaport, what you can see in the front of the drawing. This is the last book, and this drawing of on the title cover is one of the development drawings of the third Hungarian National Theatre. I have to tell you, they still didn't build it because after 3 different international competitions, they didn't find a good enough building, I think, or enough money, maybe that was more of the reason. So I mentioned in the last part of this text that these projects are different from the previous ones because the computer started to be also an element in the presentation. However, the drawings were still done first with hand, and then some very courageous people who were maybe not knowing what they got into helped me to complete the projects and submit it. Here there are 7 large projects which I all submitted with the partners, which I of course give full credit to them. This is the Paris Opera House, some of the preliminary sketches. This is a public safety building in Pittsburgh, where the structure was analyzed this way. It had 2 different grids, one for the parking for 3,000 cars and one for the office building above it. and these were also some of the development drawings of the design. This was a port building, international port building to Yokohama, and started out with the notion that garden of earth and garden of water, and then this duality was connected, dual elements were connected with a roof garden, and the building was called building of different horizons. This is the second National Theater, which was different from all the others, that it had to be added to an existing monastery, and the public part of the theater were to be placed into this existing building. The section would reveal how it worked, that some of the even the elements for the public services are in the old building. Its courtyard is covered with a roof. It was different when I finished, but the idea was approximately this. And then here is some of the drawings of the third theater, which I already mentioned at the cover. This was one of the computer drawings of the entrance of the final version, and this shows the incredibly complex urban situation where a park in the large square behind the building, but in front of them very strong many bus and other traffic actually disturb the silence of theater, which is obviously a requirement. This was a quite recent project, the addition to the Stockholm Library of Asplund, Gunnar Asplund. This was almost a caricature, one of the first drawings, I think, and it ended differently, but it was a very interesting gift from my life when all these very difficult projects, you could test your abilities and what it gives you in your own development. These are parts of these essays which different people, noted professors and experts of architectural drawings were writing. And of course, the German Architecture Museum is in Frankfurt, not in Stuttgart. So sorry, I discovered it just lately. From here on, I am showing you works which were really testing these nice and good sounding ideas in books and in academia. I had the chance actually it was interesting in Alabama, where you would the least expect that these kind of work opportunities exist, to be consultant in 2 occasions, and this was the first, an office building. The problem was to build a building which will have cars, people coming into, related to a lake, surrounded by a forest, and how can you build without disturbing this serenity of the place. So I did many explorations. These are part of my seminar project for my students to draw floor plans like this. So I did this, not just as the students. This was one of the final arrangement of the parking and the building. And this was how it related to nature and in what way the parking became also a wooded part and the building sort of crowned the end of the lake. I was thinking of the small people. The big shots obviously had offices in front of the office building looking out the lake. But what happens with the people who are, you know, in a lower position? So I thought that by placing the staircases into the corners of the front, then on one hand, this live a healthy life, so use the stairs when you go from one place to the other. But on the other hand also, it gave them opportunity to connect to this incredibly beautiful side of the lake. So that happened, but unfortunately, the value engineering stepped in, and as you can see, the intensity of these ribbon windows are in no ways connected to the middle part of the building, but it's still a pleasant surrounding. I also participated in the urban design and the master planning of the two other buildings. The point was again here that you have a very strong resistance of any contractor not to start in that way, that they flatten the area and then they put the parking there. So to do the more difficult thing, to follow the terrain with the parking, that resolved many of these questions. Mr. Wilfried Wang, the person who was the former director of the German Architecture Museum, in his essay also wrote that Peter draws like a clairvoyant. It was a very flattering statement, but I mention it here because I very strongly believe that very large part of the design, of the drawing, is somewhat in the psychic domain. Something to call up your unconscious, subconscious. The book which was about the designing of this Alabama State Office building was titled Construction Meditative. So that's what really I feel, that when one draws, somehow another reality comes in. This was one of the drawings where I made the question to the client, and I have to stop here a little bit because the client in this case was Alabama State. Alabama State is a notion, but not a person, or not 10 person, or not 30 person. So it was a very undefined client to whom these drawings every second week I showed the progress and then asked the questions which I already asked through my drawings, that would you like to occupy the whole available site and, for example, place this building, the Supreme Court, also here, and then all the branches of the government could be present. They said no, because the only available site was that area, so I had to design for that only. My luck was somebody else problem. They made a proposal, they understand the company, which was two architecture firms united for this large project, and they submitted a project to the Historic Alabama Capitol Building Committee, and the project was turned down. And they were dictated, or they were told that you have to employ somebody who is versed in larger scale urban design building, and I was lucky really to get this commission. And with this commission, I had almost complete free hand to design the building from urban scale to door handle scale. So where I mentioned to students when I showed some details of these buildings that I did not sign two construction drawings and it went wrong, those things. So this happens all the time. This was one, again, the massing explorations, which was about connecting the building to the front, facing the back, actually, of the Capitol building, and also resolving the 50 feet elevation difference between the left upper and the right lower corner of the side, which obviously, again, problems are opportunities that give us opportunity to place the parking under the building. This was my favorite drawing. Unfortunately, it was not theirs, so I had to explore further and do different things. This is very close to the final stage with the plaza in front and the diagonal entrance to the symbolic entrance to the building. Rotunda distributed the traffic between the different parts of the building. It is 750,000 square feet, so that's 3/4 of the Pentagon. It's a very large building. And this drawing shows the kind of deception with which I tried to express that this is the main entrance and it leads into a kind of significant space, but it's actually two levels. The round, the oculus, leads to a break room, and the lower levels are just the usual 10 feet, 14 feet floor-to-floor height. It was a green building, nonetheless, because it had to be operable windows, natural light, and so on. So that was something which I was very proud that we achieved that. We, of course, I'm mentioning it in this way because my hand drawings were then put to the office personnel, and they worked up as we followed both the model as well as the construction drawings first, the schematic designs, and so on. But every element from pavement to materials had to be decided, and this drawing looks like it was marinated in red wine, but it is just a problem we had in our, I think, garage in Florida, when the drawings stored there were suffering some water damage. Every panel had to be designed individually. Handrail of the staircase. I did more than 800 drawings, so that was a very interesting learning process to arrive to a building of this size where you can deal with and you have to have in your hand every particular detail. very able persons helped many of my former students, I have to say, in the firm. So it was an enjoyable work of approximately 2 years. This is the upper level of the rotunda. In the vicinity of the building, there were some historical buildings with very fine details, and the complexity of the building had to somehow also cater to those. Here is the area view. You can see how big this building is, and all the other state office building around the Capitol building could have been placed into the one building here. The area view. I proposed a solution for the connection of the Capitol building to this building, that this middle place parking would have been freed up into a promenade, so the connection would have been symbolically emphasized also, but last time I was there, it was still not constructed that way, but that's just the case. This was a very unpleasant thing, because one journalist, Mr. Upton, came from New York and put me on the cover of the Montgomery magazine, new face of Alabama's capital city, and the firm owners were very annoyed that not they were on the cover. This is the last build project which I show. This is a sports and cultural center in Budapest. I was in America. All the drawings were faxed. Unfortunately, at that time, this was more than 10 years ago, computer connections were not as well developed, or maybe I didn't know how to handle them. So you can see the text because all the instructions were given through the drawings. A colleague and friend of mine, former dean of the School of Architecture, had a firm, A&D Studio. Another partner was Ernie Rubik, the inventor of Rubik Cube. So it was a well-run firm, a very interesting firm. They took on the production, the actual construction drawings and construction administration. Mostly I did the drawings from, again, small details to large ones. I just randomly selected some details which maybe you can see on the following photographs. So again, details of structure and solutions in details, especially when I discovered that with all the mathematical knowledge and PhDs in mathematics and structure, structure engineers have not much sense to space. So many of the structures I had to draw up, and they were built. When, with students from here, we went to Budapest because we had a project there 2 years ago. The students told me that, oh, they look like your drawings. And indeed, because they did it as it was drawn and, of course, made to construction documents by my friends and very talented people in his office. This is a latest computer rendering of the as yet unfinished ensemble. This part was not built yet. This is the inside of this big hall. When we were there, they made it to a hockey court and a hockey field, and small children were learning to play hockey. It was really very interesting. They fell more than they ran, but they were very sweet. This is how it is. Obviously, sorry, let me show a better image. The surrounding buildings here and all around are the usual geometrical so-called point houses, which meant sort of 16-story high residential buildings. And the idea was here that this becomes part of the terrain, so it had this arrangement that under the serving areas of the structure was placed. Here you see right side Buddha, right side Pest, left side Buddha, and you can see here the building. All of this has been built. This is the second phase, which is not ready as yet. The interesting personnel element that in this building, in this place, this is east, I have seen many, many times the sun coming up, especially in my last years of studies. That was the architectural building, the central architectural building. This is in Rome, maybe the one building which I didn't draw on as imagination or imagined, but then these parts I did already, and these show how these surface diagrams actually describe the non-space and the space here and here, and especially here. You can imagine that this is the edge of infinity. So if you can put architecture in your mind into that context, then I wouldn't encourage you to think you are God, but very close to it, you know, because it definitely, who can do this, you know, to form or shape the infinite? Believe it or not, this is our home on Newbury Street, and this is the so-called simplified general space print, which is a kind of structural description of a house, in this case, our house. Students honored me by inviting me to do an article in Oz 36th issue. So if you will make an effort to read it, you will learn more about this aspect. This is the Villa Rotonda of Palladio. I don't think when you were here, when you were there, Matt, you read it that way, but it really is the space, and this is how the spaces are connected to the outside and to each other. No wonder that one came up with the idea that architecture is roots of infinity, because these are really very much looking like roots. This is one of the last projects, and I am going to finish. Amsterdam, in this place, there is a yellow pushpin. This was a competition for a pedestrian bridge, which we did with Will Yankee, who I guess since yesterday is in Stockholm, working for Will, hired by a firm there. And this was the drawing which I did to it. And interestingly enough, on the same area here, that was the site for a city hall for Amsterdam. And Mr. Holzbauer, an Austrian architect, convinced the city fathers to do not only a city hall, which is that part, but an opera house. You can imagine 10 years it was in the making, and they are still not finished the underground connection to it. But my project was much, much earlier, and obviously a non-winning project to the same site, but this is very interesting to see again back the same site as a project. This was a project for skyscrapers. Evolo, Italian magazine, every year has a competition for skyscrapers, which sometimes appear underground, which sometimes appear under sea. But we did a skyscraper, meaning again with real Yankee, who did this, in my mind, very beautiful renderings of the project. And this last project is a cooperation with Tyler Hyatt, my friend here in the first row. I did these drawings on that already mentioned penultimate program, electronic way of drawing, and he made from those ugly lines this beautiful sculpture. This was a house for Michelangelo, and this is the image with which I finished my presentation. One sentence I would like, if you remember, that you have to learn the craft of design in order to learn and do the design of the craft. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruce. Any questions? If I can, I answer them. No. Okay. Everybody is hungry, so thank you very much for your attention.